Hello and welcome to the Estee Show. Today we continue our deep dive into fractional product leadership with Aakash Gupta. If you haven't listened to the 35th episode with Ben Erez, who spoke about his experience as a fractional leader, I encourage you to go back and listen. It provides a great first-person perspective on how to navigate the space. As I delved into the rabbit hole of fractional product leadership, I stumbled upon an article that Aakash wrote with Jason Knight, who's the host of the One Night in Product podcast. For this article, Aakash interviewed 20 fractional PMs to compile the masterpiece, which has over 16,000 words. It might sound easy, but conducting 20 interviews requires a significant amount of time. Reaching out, scheduling the calls, rescheduling the calls, conducting the interviews, reviewing the notes, synthesizing insights, understanding the trends. All of that took them 2 months to complete. In the article, Aakash does not hold back. He discusses everything from how individuals enter fractional product leadership to their pricing strategies, how to set up engagements, how to avoid pitfalls. He outlines how to structure these engagements for successful outcomes, ensuring they don't drag on indefinitely unless that's the desired outcome. For each topic, Aakash provides specific examples and guidelines. I had previously heard Aakash on the Supra podcast a few months ago, where he discussed recruitment and finding a job in product. I was driving while listening, but the episode was so packed with good practical tips that I pulled over to the curb to take notes. That's how good Aakash is, and I'm pretty sure when you're listening to this episode, you will also want to take notes. A bit about Aakash. He is the former VP of product who spent 15 years in product roles at different companies like Apollo.io, Epic Games, that's one of the big gaming companies, ThredUp, you might know it as the resale fashion company, and Affirm. You might recognize that company from checking out in stores online where it lets you pay with installments over time. Nowadays, he is one of the most respected gurus in the product management community. He runs a newsletter called the Product Growth Newsletter, which covers career topics for PMs and growth professionals, and has over 125,000 subscribers. If you haven't signed up yet, make sure you do so. I'll include links to everything in the show notes. Who is this episode for? It's primarily aimed at those who have spent 10 to 15 years in product management, enjoy aspects of their work, but are ready for a change. Those people typically seek more flexibility and diversity in their experiences. If you're curious about how people are successfully building fractional careers or considering exploring that path for yourself, I think you'll find this conversation extremely valuable. Now, I recorded this conversation a couple of weeks ago, and it was fascinating to compare Aakash's insights, an outsider explaining how things are done based on research, with Ben's firsthand experience. And a lot of the things lined up. A few examples. Aakash says that fractional product leaders are always hustling. Yes, they're a fractional product leader, but they also have a side business in coaching. They also run workshops. They also go after speaking engagements. And as I was recording the conversation with Ben, he was setting up his first interview workshop. Another point that Aakash made was about the importance of relationship building to secure clients and subsequently new clients. And Ben also emphasized how powerful that is when setting up that kind of career. Anyhow, I hope you enjoy this conversation. Please share it with a friend. Without further ado, let's speak with Aakash. Aakash, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I listened to a couple of your episodes with Itamar and Alex, and I'm a big fan of the show, so I'm excited to be here.
Well, and I'm a big fan of yours. I've heard you before even knowing that it was you, and then I saw one of your posts and I reached out, and then I connected the dots and realized who you are. So it's such an honor to have you here. The post I want to dive into with you is about fractional product leadership. It's no news to anyone who's been in the product management world that layoffs have been rampant starting in 2022 and just never ending. It's like the high that the companies get off of just all of the cut spend. Therefore, the environment in big companies, which used to be sort of the core of stability, and companies wanted people to feel like family, even though we all know it's BS and you can stay around. Suddenly, the stable jobs don't feel stable at all, and people are out of jobs. And we're seeing many more talented people choose a fractional or a part-time or a consulting thing instead of going into a full-time role. That's sort of how I'm thinking of setting the stage for this conversation. You wrote a big post about it, but why don't we start with understanding sort of what fractional leadership is? It's been going on forever, but what gave it a rise in the recent 2 years?
Yeah, so fractional as a term is relatively new. I'll rewind even a little bit back to, when the economy started. People needed to keep track of the numbers. And so actually the fractional accountants were really like the first sort of fractional role. And fractional finance has been growing slowly since those initial days of when numbers even were invented. And so you see fractional CFOs. Nowadays, a lot of people see fractional accountants, fractional legal help. All of these things exist. But most recently, it has broken into product. So actually, since the early 90s, we saw interim product leaders. So a lot of people listening might have heard of, for instance, Rich Mironov. He's been doing interim product roles for like nearly 20 plus years. So there's folks like that who in the 90s and early 2000s started doing these interim product roles. Often they were brought in to transform the company. Maybe they were waterfall and they wanted to become agile, or maybe they wanted to implement some of Marty Kagan and Silicon Valley Product Group's advice to be more empowered. So these are often scenarios where interim product leaders were brought in. As the CTO fractional role gained a lot of traction between 2012 and 2016, that's when we started seeing the first fractional product leaders. So these really combine elements of both interim and consulting. Whereas interim, you're thinking of a full-time role, but it was to bridge a gap or a crisis or transform. And consultants are often like targeted expertise to address a specific problem or transform. Fractional leaders are a little bit of both. You're adaptive and embedded inside. So you're filling some gaps while providing strategic guidance. And many fractional leaders are hired to transform, or maybe the company had a crisis. So a very common scenario might be they had to lay a bunch of people off. They let off most of the product team, but now the founders are finding out that they can't handle the whole product workload. Or another common scenario might be that their awesome product leader got burnt out or left. And so they need somebody to bridge the gap while they find another one. So those are the common reasons we see fractional leaders and kind of the brief history of how it's grown out to be where it is today.
Since you brought up the fractional accountant or lawyer, I have opinions, but is that considered a successful practice? Like I've seen startups with lawyers on demand, and I think for some industries it might make sense, but for some industries where there's a lot of regulation, like it doesn't make sense to have a lawyer on demand, because then the company is incentivized to not engage with legal counsel when they should be engaging with legal counsel because they're paying by the hour. And I feel like that leads to a lot of shortcuts and problems in the long term. Curious if that, and I've seen also a fractional CFO. I had a conversation at one of the companies, and the idea he proposed was so incompatible with what the company's offering was. So I asked the fractional CFO, I said, have you ever used the product? And he said, no, because to propose the idea he had proposed would only make sense for someone who doesn't understand the product. So I feel like this fractional, and I don't know on the product side, but on the two legal side or finance side, creates an environment where the person's not bought in, doesn't have to do the research or have a level of understanding that someone who's truly embedded in the product or in the company would have.
Yeah, I think those people you worked with gave fractional a bad name. I think that those are like the common sort of ways to mess up your fractional engagement. And I heard that from fractional product leader after fractional product leader, is that you kind of feel the pressure to deliver value quickly so that they continue to extend your contract. And so a mistake a lot of fractional product leaders make early on in their fractional careers, they start to try to apply playbooks of what worked at their prior companies without understanding the appropriate context of what will work at this specific company. So that's a big problem. And then a second element of the problem you mentioned was the company doesn't want to engage in them as often as possible. So that is also a big problem. So the way I would think about it is I'm guessing that those legal, especially that you mentioned, are billing by the hour. And that's a very common practice in the legal industry. And so you look at like, a $600-700 hourly bill and you feel like, let's minimize the amount of time. Luckily, the way most fractional product leaders work is they have certain days of the week, and they're pretty good about messaging to folks even outside of those days if something is truly needed, because you are coming in a leadership role. Like it's we're not exactly talking about fractional product management right now, but even the fractional product managers I talked to said, like, once a day at least, they will be checking their Slack and email and providing support to people who might need it. Let's say they wrote a PRD and designers and engineers have questions, or they wrote a product strategy and the team is implementing. So certainly there is a little bit of an element of being available and not billing by the hour. It's more that, like, when I'm available for particular days, maybe I'm available Monday, Tuesday, that's when you can book me for meetings. That's when you can expect a more thought out email reply, a thought out Slack reply. So part of that is a little bit different there. And then sort of the final element to fractional legal and accounting of your question was like, should we hire them and have them in-house? And generally my recommendation across all of these fractional roles is, if over a year you have spent enough to just as you would on a full-time person, plus you expect the demand to remain equal or higher the next year, then it's a really good time to hire. So you can think about a fractional as almost like a way to save money with some expected compromises in quality. But, if you can get an amazing fractional product leader for 2 days a week for 6 months and you can solve a task, you might be able to save half the amount of money that you would have spent. And that could be $250,000, $300,000. So it could be a pretty big amount. With that amount, you might be able to hire another software engineer. So there's some trade-offs that founders should think about. And in general, what I find is that it's really the bootstrapped, the pre-seed, the seed, and the Series A founders that are making the decisions where a fractional makes sense. After that stage, for sure, and after basically Series B and 10 million revenue bootstrapped, you should start to think about full-time more.
So that's from the company's perspective. Let's talk about from the candidate's perspective. At which point should a candidate be saying, maybe I should look at fractional, maybe fractional is better for me than a full-time role?
Yeah. So the first thing to think about is, do you think you can avoid some of the mistakes that Estee just pointed out? Like, can you ramp up really, really quickly in an environment? Will you be able to handle situations where you need to provide value, but you might not even have all of the context? Can you context switch? Multiple fractional product leaders we talked to in this piece, along with my co-author Jason Knight, found and mentioned to us that they might actually mix up context details if they have like 3 gigs going on. They might say, oh yeah, but sales is on our butts about this feature. And then the team will be like, no, we shipped that feature like a year ago. And they'll be like, oh my God, that's my other company. I'm so sorry. So you need to avoid those types of things. So those are like the, I don't know, innate or work skills that you just need to have as a baseline on top of already being like a pretty experienced product manager or product leader. I would say if you don't have 5 years minimum of product management experience, it's probably not worth it. It's going to be too hard for you to market yourself. And realistically, especially if you're going for product leadership, you want 15 years of experience. So those are like then the sort of positive indicators. Then the final thing is, what do you want out of your life? So most people choose product leadership fractionally because they want to make about as much as they were making full time, but with working less and with more flexibility. So the hourly rate for a fractional role is typically about 40% higher than what you would have been making full time. And that 40% is covering all the time you're marketing yourself, all the time you're trying to sell your next deal. So ultimately, then what often ends up happening is that fractional product leaders will make slightly less than they would full time, but they actually are happy with that decision because A, they're way more flexible. B, they have full control over their schedule. So you typically see this with people with young children making this decision. And then 3, and the final and maybe most important thing for people who stick around for a long time is your rate of learning is generally fast. This is kind of the sales pitch that everybody, if they remember back in their college days when McKinsey and Bain were on campus, they were like, yeah, 2 years at McKinsey is equal to 1 year at a normal company. A lot of fractional leaders also said that type of thing to us because they're working in so many different environments and context switching, they're learning faster.
I've spoken with a number of, I'm thinking of one specific conversation. Let's not overblow this. But one fractional CPO who told me they offered me the actual CPO role and I said no, I can't do it. Another fractional head of marketing also said they offered me the full head of marketing role and I said no. Why is it that if people are working in a company and are working well enough that the company wants to extend them or to transition them into a full-time role, that they're saying, no, actually, I prefer, I'll tell you, I think what I'm hearing is there are concerns about those companies that as a fractional leader, they feel they can retain some sort of control over themselves. Let's say they don't like the way the leader treats others, or they're not going to be respected as a human being. Whereas a fractional person, you can say, this is what I recommend. They either go with your recommendation. They don't, your life is not as invested in it. When it's your full-time role and you know those people and you know how they act, you understand that you won't be able to keep your I don't know, mental health in check if you take this role on full-time. Is that accurate? At which point is it really a logical decision of dollar to time ratio versus like, I just can't do it, even though financially this might make sense?
Yeah, so you actually, a lot of savvy leaders these days are purposefully taking on interim roles with companies where there have question marks. So it's like very important, like in this market, SD has experienced firsthand, I've experienced firsthand, to go reach out to people who used to work at a company before you accept the job. And you have to ask them, what's the reality on the ground? What is the CEO micromanaging? How much empowered are the teams? How much turnover is there in this company, right? And when you ask those questions, a lot of times, if you do get the job offer, you'll find that it's at one of those companies, right? They're the companies who need to hire more often. And so I've talked to a lot of people who actually weren't even interested in interim, and they said, "Yeah, I just took an interim so I could test the waters." So that's a very common thing for a savvy leader, and I recommend listeners think about that. The sort of second case is the fractional career fractional. So I actually found that these people are pretty rare, but there are people who, when they're in an environment, even if they like it, they have to say no. And so Rich Mironov, again, he's a great example. He's a career sort of interim and fractional, and he's really pretty good at what he does. So he mentioned that basically every single engagement he has, they ask him to stay him on full time. And he's been doing this for decades. And so what he does, and he coaches a lot of interims as well, is he says, you need to actually have the reason to say no to them ready from like before you even sign with them. So what Rich will often do, which may or may not be true, is like when he's working with a small company, he'll say something like, yeah, I'm usually more of a big company guy. So if I come in, it'll be, for a little bit. And then when they finally ask him to convert full time, he'll say, it's not you, it's me. I'm more of a big company guy. And then he'll do the vice versa to big companies. So it's good to sort of end really gracefully. And you don't want them to know that you actually found the environment toxic, because most fractionals get their clients from referrals. So it's really important to actually end each engagement on a beautiful note. And you ideally want them to be asking you to come full time. So a couple of people since the post was published, were doing fractional work, and they reached out to me and I said, yeah, like your goal should be that they ask you to come full time and you have to say no. That leaves them wanting more. A couple of people who have been doing it longer even said they've followed around the same leader to multiple companies. There may come a time when you have a dry spell and you'll just have to go back and work for another toxic leader at their third company. So it's always worth sort of keeping those relationships positive, even if you felt like you were mistreated.
Can we dive into a little bit about referrals and staying in strong relationships? For full-time roles, it's also very important to leave a company on good terms. How is that different? Because in a full-time role, you're going in, and today it could be with the illusion, like I'm coming here to stay here until I retire. But there's this idea we're not talking about an end date. It's like going into a marriage. Versus like going into an interim role is more like going on a vacation. Like we're going to have a great time. We're going to do great things, but we know that we can't afford to stay past day X. So in a way, I feel like it could be easier to have a good relationship, but What's sort of the secret to ending on good terms or to dealing with differences of opinion and the difference that it is in a full-time role versus a fractional role?
Yeah. So I think of the 2 or 3 tips I glossed from our 20 interviews. One really interesting one was have the milestones for your exit pre negotiated. So a lot of people, how they sell these fractional work, because they are big, it's like a $200,000-300,000 check often for the company at the end of the day, is they'll sell like a $5,000 to $10,000 assessment up front. It might be like 3-day assessment. So in this assessment, they would come up with all of their milestones. Their milestones might be hiring 3 new PMs, firing the 2 underperforming ones, replacing them, getting a new design leader who understands empowered design, changing the methods that sales reaches out to product about feature requests and being accountable for that. And then often the final milestone will be something like hiring my replacement, hiring your new head of product. And that's a really good way to kind of have a pre-established, not fixed end date, but end milestone. And so as you achieve that milestone, you often leave on great terms. And it's also a good way then to have sort of those long tail clients where you might just have like 1 or 2 hours of support for them, which you just add on top of what you have for the next couple months while that person is ramping up. So that's one of the things. Now, as it relates to full-time roles, which was the other part of your question, the way I would think about your fractional work versus your full-time work is as a fractional, you're typically being hired for some area of expertise. And if you're not, you should try to establish what that is very early on. As a full-time, you're part of the team, you're glue, like you're doing whatever. If there's a reorg, you're happy. You're at least trying to act like you can handle the reorg, not always be happy, but you need to flux with the situations versus as a fractional. I think what's much better is like figure out like, this is my lane. This is the small amount of stuff I'm going to be completing, or this is the small sector of stuff I'm going to be completing. One of the fractionals we talked to who's been doing really well, she likes to say like, there is this product management work being done at the company. What you want to map out is what are the gaps in product management work that should be being done. Identify those super clearly and then kind of own that lane. And that becomes kind of the scope of work for your project for whatever duration. And that's how you kind of then, instead of having a marriage, really create a vacation where once I complete this scope of work or this stream of work, that's it. That's one scenario. There's also, I would say, like 40% of the fractionals we talk to do want it to turn into a full-time role. In which case, act like a full-time person. If the circumstances in the business change and they reorg the product team, kind of raise your hand and productively help them understand like, oh, this is the new gap. Like I can work there.
So in terms of duration, before we hit the record button, we were talking about how long does it actually take to have impact. And I imagine that timeline for fractional is different than for full-time. Also tapping into my experience, which might not be the healthiest in the industry, but like there have been environments where a person comes into the role and the OKRs are like making the company profitable in 90 days or like 5x revenue within 6 months. Like if a company is bringing in a fractional role, how do you make sure that the goals are realistic and that the amount of time you have and that the resources that you have are aligned with actually enabling you to get to the goal that your contract is promising?
Yeah, I didn't talk to anybody who took on like any OKRs, basically. You like outcome metrics like that. Because yeah, it's basically impossible to 5x the revenue of the company in 6 months unless you're the founder, right? We all kind of know that. Same with making the company profitable. Like, it's the founder's job. The product leader, what can they do? They can potentially cut costs like 20-30% here or there with the eng team. Ideally, the eng team should really lead that. So they can't really affect that side of the cost equation. And then, yeah, product work takes a long time to lead to revenue impact. It's not like sales or marketing where you suddenly turn on the ads and you hire more sales reps and all of a sudden the revenue is in. Like it's happening in a much longer time scale. So generally, a much better way to establish a fractional product is, even if they didn't hire you for an assessment, just do the assessment. So like, you're a fractional now. Don't wait for what they are telling you to do. You proactively go to them and say, this is what I'm going to do. What I'm going to do is in this first week, I'm going to identify like, these are the things that I'm going to solve. Or maybe it's these first month if you're only on a 1 day a week engagement. This first month, I'm going to identify these are the things we're going to solve. And that way, you should get some non key result related things you're going to accomplish. I am going to help switch the team to continuous discovery. That's a milestone people often take up. So I'm going to make sure that each engineer, PM, and tech lead is talking to 2 customers a week. And I'm going to, once we get that, I'm good to go. So that's like an incremental way to go. Or I am going to, if you're a fractional PM, although we talk to more fractional product leaders for this piece, I am going to handle all of the PM duties for this specific squad. For the PM duties, meaning I might create like the OKRs that this squad needs to attain, but I'm not going to be able to be held accountable for these OKRs because I might not be here the whole time. So you're doing like a stream of work. There is one exception. As soon as we start talking about such a broad topic like fractional, there's always exceptions. So you'll actually find there's a huge rise in fractional product agencies. So McKinsey, BCG both have big arms now of fractional product managers. And then
Is
you
that
have
digital ventures?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. But specifically doing product management work. And then you'll also have a company called like Product People and 2 more whose names I'm currently forgetting, but are in the piece, who have pretty big staffs of fractional product managers. Those companies, unlike the individuals we've been talking about up until this point, do often sell themselves on like an ROI type of thing. Like that's actually how McKinsey makes all of its money. Like they're like, oh, we're going to 10x, it costs $1 million, we're going to generate $10 million type of thing. So those companies are the most likely to do that. And in terms of setting yourself up for success, it's all about how you calculate the ROI. So I worked at a consulting company for a while, and what I found is that they are very rigorous about calculating and predicting the ROI. So for instance, we might work on like a cost optimization project for a restaurant. So worked for like PF Chang's, for instance. We brought in a partner who had done cost optimization for literally all of PF Chang's competitors. And so he could bring the data of, oh yeah, we were able to reduce the paper category from 10 to 17%. We were able to reduce the travel category from 40 to 60%. So you basically create these experts or partners at BCG, Bain, wherever you are, who understand what the ROI is. And it's up to them to really be able to structure the project, manage the stakeholders, and so that's why they're paid like much more than the average person at the company, but they're also working on like 10 projects at a time.
It's funny, as you were saying, like make it around output, right? Like around project specifics, not around outcome, with all of the screaming and Lenny screaming about output driven roadmaps and how horrible they are. And we don't want to be those types of leaders. You're saying when it comes to your own role, make sure it's measurable and truly within your control.
It depends. I mean, some of you listening might be fractionals who are like raising your hands and saying, no, I take on outcomes. But really, to address sort of the question you had, which is like, I'm going into an environment where they have, first of all, they're not succeeding super well. Second of all, like the types of outcomes they want to sign me up for are likely unrealistic. And third of all, like, I don't actually want to transition to full time. If all 3 of those conditions exist, then I'm not saying that you shouldn't help your product team switch to outcomes over outputs. I'm saying the conditions for success for your fractional role should be specific outputs, like I'm switching the team from outputs to outcomes, like I'm switching the team from agile to waterfall. I am handling the head of product role for 6 months. Those are the type of milestones you want to structure as success, because going back to our prior question, you absolutely want to make sure you succeed in all these fractional roles. It's even more of an issue than your full-time roles, where you can just go apply or talk to recruiters, or for most PMs over the last 10 years, recruiters landed in your inbox, regardless of how you were performing. So there's that giant difference that your acquisition is all from referral. So it's really against your interest to sign up for any goal you can't achieve, which is again why Bain or BCG is paying these partners $2 million a year to come up with goals that they can achieve.
One more thing I want to bring up that I heard you speak about with Jason Knight was as your newsletter grew, the work actually became less enjoyable, but also more difficult because you felt more responsibility. Like if 5 people are reading your advice, you're like, if it's bad advice, who cares? But then if it's 100,000 people receiving your advice and you're misleading people or you're giving people bad advice, that's a much bigger responsibility. I want to call you out for saying that because Marty Kagan in Transformed and in his conversation with Lenny basically gave advice to product leaders or product managers who are stuck in feature factory teams, saying your responsibility is basically to transform your organization, whether organization wants it or not. And there was a ton of blowback, basically saying, hey, I've tried that. I just got fired. So I'd love to talk a little bit about how you write your content based on interviews. You go out and you interview 20, 30 people about a specific topic, and then you write your post. How, number one, I just feel like you're a walking encyclopedia. The amount of knowledge you have, specific examples, numbers, you're always willing to throw out. But how do you deal with that responsibility piece that I think others in this industry might be less careful about?
Yeah, I think he does deserve to be called out about that because it's not just like 1 or 2 PMs who have been fired or laid off for that. It's like many, 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 many. So I've actually done a collaboration with Marty. I actually think he is really smart and thoughtful. And I think that if you were to have engaged with Marty while you were going about trying to transform the company, he might have been able to help you a little bit too. So I want to like defend Marty. My fundamental sort of take on everything is I never understood what was so bad about feature factories or what was so bad about outputs. And having worked at places like Google, I certainly didn't see that they were empowered or focused on outcomes. You can talk, I've talked to hundreds of Google PMs. You can talk to any Google PM today. In Inspired and in Transformed, it makes it sound like they all come up with their own feature ideas. That's just not the case. Like I'm currently working with a Google PM on Google Gemini's API on a post. And we've talked in detail about all of his work, all of the features he's been shipping. I've asked him questions like, where did this idea come from? How'd you get buy-in? Like, it's never been the case that him and his designer talked to customers, they brought the tech lead in, and they discovered a solution that Google execs had never heard of. No, like every single solution, Google execs, all the way up to Sundar, because this is the Google Gemini we're talking about, had already considered, thought about these solutions, and had been debating them. The PM and the designer would go and bring new information to them about the options that they might not have thought of, but it's not like people are suddenly discovering features out of thin air. I honestly don't know where he got that misconception from. 99% of product features somebody else has built already. In Gemini's case, like OpenAI has built them already. You're thinking about how do we sequence these? What goes first? What's going to be most impactful for my users? And for all those things, PMs and designers and user researchers and analysts can bring new insights to the table. And so there's this element of what the reality of empowered PM literally exists nowhere. I have certainly never been in an environment where that exists. Now, there is these sort of 75% empowered environments where PMs do have a lot of room on their roadmap to come up with features that they truly discover. They have a lot of room to push back on executives. Executives are happy to listen to new information. So that seems to be kind of the ideal in this real world where like you have execs making at Google $2.5 million a year. You're making $400,000 a year. Do you really think that they're just making that because they've been in the company longer? No, like they're actually adding that much more value to the company. They're having to prove their jobs on a day in, day out basis, and they know a thing or two about what features should be built and why features should be built. And so I think that this whole idea of like a feature factory or empowerment is BS because it literally doesn't exist anywhere. And so as a PM, you need to figure out where you are on that spectrum of feature factory to empowered. Like nobody is actually at 100% empowered, but some people are at 0% empowered. And you do want to slowly move your company over, literally just so that you can succeed and the company can succeed. Because not even Google can figure out what it should be building in its product features without going and talking to customers and validating things. And literally it's just so that you can hit your OKRs as a PM. So to actually hit those metrics, to actually succeed, you definitely do need to bring elements of empowerment, of continuous discovery, of allowing tech leads and designers to decide details instead of executives. And so all of that is really important. And what I would say is that you want to localize sort of your impact. So that's the Marty Kagan topic. The second part of your question was about calling me out about the responsibility. So I actually personally don't I probably fall into the mistake of saying stuff like Marty a little too boldly that doesn't apply to everybody all the time. And people will call me out. And so I have to delete tweets and delete LinkedIn posts on the regular. But I think the thing with me is, the thing with me is like, I find that compared to other people at my level of followership, I'm way more willing to listen to the advice, listen to the haters. If you comment on my posts a couple times that you dislike or disagree with them, I'll usually send you my meeting link and we'll chat about it. Maybe we'll even do a collab. I recently did a collab with somebody who's really large. And I would say like literally everything that I suggested or something, they like literally weren't able to budge. Like they just had to go by what was in their book that's selling millions of copies. And so I find myself on the other end of the spectrum where I might say some stuff that's like a hot take that only applies to the 15 years of PM experience that I have in the United States, and people in Brazil might not resonate. But then usually I'll listen to them and I'll qualify or I'll delete or I'll comment or I'll come up with a new post 2 weeks from now and I'll say, here's what's actually going on in Brazil. So that's how I try to handle it.
Can you give me an example of something you had? I don't even want to say you had to delete, but that you deleted as a result of comments.
So many things. So recently, so interestingly enough, for anybody who's listening this long, you might be creating your own content. Here's a couple hot tips about X. Number one, you need to post a lot. Number two, you need to post things that encourage comments, replies. Number three, there are very, very few product managers on X. There are a ton of software engineers and designers on X, and there are a ton of indie builders on X. And almost all of the people who are on X don't like product managers. Putting all that together, if you want to succeed on X, it doesn't help you to just always say like product managers are awesome. Product managers are great. I love product managers. Here's how to succeed as a product manager. Actually, it's really good if you want to grow on X to be humble about here's some things that product managers got wrong. Here's some areas where product management as a profession needs to improve. So I recently posted a video of a Microsoft PM who has 30,000 plus followers on TikTok and Instagram, who posted a short where she was working from 9:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. And I posted on my X like PM saying she's working from 9:30 to 4 facepalm. And a lot of product leaders at very reputable places were like up in arms, like, oh gosh, I can't believe you're resharing this content. And personally, they just felt hurt that like I was hurting the PM field. But for me, it's more that I think
I'm sorry, like what were they upset about? The facepalm?
Yeah, they were very upset, like up in arms, like literally like DMing me, ransacking my replies. Some of these people posted on LinkedIn and added me that I had posted this video. So all my posts, people have like get riled up. And so, yeah, like people get so riled up. And I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to take the L on this one. Like, I don't care. But if I need to take this L on this, I'll just delete it.
Why didn't you just tell them eat it? Like,
well, they're all prominent product leaders. Fundamentally, like product management isn't a big world. Like I would much rather be liked by everybody. Happy to admit my mistakes, happy to change my tune. And yeah, fundamentally, I'm selling a product too, where a lot of these people are my buyers. They're buyers of my paid newsletter. And so I would rather they not unsubscribe and they tell their teams to subscribe as well. So I'm kind of, that's what happens to me is I'm stuck selling and making money off these people. So I have to listen to them. And that's how all companies, I think, end up feeling. That's why all your big companies are always celebrating, things that are not based, et cetera, et cetera.
And so what do you think of the feature X just announced where likes are private?
I love it. Literally, like I can like things again. Honestly, like my wife used to like police my likes. Like all of my subscribers used to police my likes. Now I can just go in there and like Yeah, this cheesy thread, like I love cheesy threads. I love clickbait threads, but I could never like those things. Now I can just go in there and like, and my For You feed has gotten so much better. What do you think?
I mean, I love it. I feel like I've been liking things anyways, but much to my personal brand detriment. And now I feel like I won't be penalized. So that's great. And also,
Yeah, it's the worst on LinkedIn. Like I don't know if this happens to you, but
that's how I
for
found
me,
you because Ben
yeah,
Erez
if I
liked your
likes
post.
yeah, if you like your post, like it shows it to your followers and it's just like, "Oh my gosh."
Yeah, think twice before you like. But
Yeah.
it is true that X, I would say for me, it's like 90% political and then 10% maybe career PM related stuff. And then there
Wow.
was this post, and I don't know if it was in the political category or the product management category, but it was a picture of cheerleaders and saying Sheen hires cheerleaders to motivate the software engineers. And the person who posted it commented, like, we call that product managers.
Yeah, that's right. I saw that post. It's hilarious. That's yeah. There's way less than 10% is PM or tech or career related. I don't see any political, thank God, because
Oh,
I
okay.
immediately hit the three dots. Not interested in
Not
this post.
interested.
I'm fundamentally only interested in seeing what the tech people are talking about.
And yeah, and in another one of your podcast episodes on Supra, you spoke about how because X is has so little content, it's a good way to actually build networking and connect with roles.
Not yeah, with roles, absolutely. Because there are a lot of founders and investors and just generally successful people. Like a lot of people only use LinkedIn as their channel. And then when they collaborate with me, they're blown away at who reads and replies to their posts when I promote it on social media. Because, my typical post on X goes to thousands of CEOs. So, like, you'll see the Brex CEO or the Shopify CEO or even like Tim Cook and those types of people replying to my posts, liking my posts. So very high profile, powerful people. Lena Khan has liked a post of mine, like very, very senior people who are actually players in the world. Chamath, Jason, David Sachs, all of them have interacted
The
with me
All
on
In
Twitter.
podcast.
Yeah, all of them have. So also it just makes me known to them so that if I want to reach out to them about something, they might potentially reply, be more likely to reply.
One more thing that you touched upon with the 40%, but that I want to sort of complete the conversation on fractional leadership is how to price it. How much should a company pay for it? And how should someone considering a fractional role figure out what their price is?
Yeah. Generally, as a company first, the idea is not to like nickel and dime with your fractional roles. It's to find somebody who you think like you wouldn't almost be able to afford full time because they just have, maybe they have 35 years of PM experience at big tech. Like you're not going to be paying $2.5 million to this person. But maybe you do want to spend $500,000 for 20% of their time because they do, maybe they built up YouTube and you're creating the next YouTube competitor, whatever it might be. Like it's actually a way for you to get access to expertise that you might not have been otherwise able, and that's why you have to pay up for it. And so how you think about that is like the most average sort of price in the US these days for a fractional product leader is like roughly $1,200 a day. So that's kind of like in your mind. Like I also talk to fractional product leaders in India, like as you guys know, like because of currency, et cetera, like that goes down to almost like 200 USD. So, but don't let those numbers sway you. Really, like the percentage we talked about where it's roughly 40% more on an hourly basis than you would be paying a full-time person is a good way to think about it. So if there was someone with X amount of years of experience in product management, how much would you pay them full-time? 40% more is like how much you'd be willing to pay for the fractional. And if you think about it, especially because we're both in the US, like you're paying benefits on your full-time people of roughly 40%. So just for them to cover their benefits is 40%. It's actually kind of crazy in the US, right? So that's one element in terms of the company side. Now, on the person side, a lot of people actually mentioned that they made the mistake of having too high of a price up front.
Mm.
And what they would have preferred is like a year or two of just 100% utilization, like always on projects, but maybe just making like the normal rate, for instance.
Mm.
So it's actually worth first establishing yourself as a fractional product leader creating that base of happy clients so that you then have the pipeline in the future. And this is based on this insight that no matter who you are, you've impressed some people in your career. So when you first go fractional, you'll get like roughly 2 years of work from those people. But the key is, how do you get more after that? And
Right.
that's when a lot of people hit a brick wall. They do 2 years of fractional work, they used their prior network, and then they're done. One of the most reliable ways is to impress the board at the company you're at, because you're coming in as a leader, you should be talking to the board anyways. Impress the board and then use the board to get your next job. And at your next job, the next CEO will reach out to your old CEO and ask how you did. So make sure that they then say really good things about you.
Wow. And in terms of companies, like, is your advice to someone looking for a fractional role, take any role that presents itself as an opportunity, or do you advise caution?
Yeah, well, we interviewed all sorts of fractional leaders. Like some of them, they were like just desperate for work. They were like, I would say that the supply of fractional leaders has probably 2 or 3x'd in the last year. So they were literally feeling the market dynamics where they were just like, I used to be making more than I used to make full time. I had been doing this for a long time. Now suddenly there's everybody on the market. They're charging much less than me. And so you have to kind of open up your aperture for who you would work with. If you have the opportunity to be selective, I would definitely guide you towards being selective. And some very small fraction of the people we talk to do, because there's basically this power law where 20% of the fractional leaders are wanted for 80% of the opportunities. And so I talked to a couple different people who, what they do is they have so much demand that the roles that they're not as interested in, they give those leads to other fractional product leaders, usually as like an affiliate fee. So they'll be like, I'll get 10% of whatever you got out of that. And there are other people who are then latching on to these really successful fractional leaders and getting all their work from them. And that can be a pretty good deal for you, especially in your first few years before you have all those leads. So that's how I would think about it.
That's so cool. You're basically saying being desperate is never good.
Ideally not, but you never know. Like you might have the opportunity to just make some good connections. So I always say it's better to have work than not have work. Like if you have been a fractional leader without work for a month, like that's a month you've been dipping into your savings. It's much better to just go ahead and take this slightly toxic job, and maybe you'll impress your design partner. Maybe you'll impress your engineering partner. After this company inevitably folds, if it's such a toxic place, maybe they'll recommend you at the next place. So there's always sort of a positive way to spin it. And a lot of the fractional leaders I talk to are working at companies where they were just like, they wouldn't ever work there full time. So your bar is different.
Okay. And then if someone is that desperate, would you tell that, like, are those people already just open to either fractional or full time? And they're like, just anything that looks half normal, I'll go for?
A lot of them actually were interested in fractional because they'd been doing fractional for a while and they like fractional. And again, why do people come into fractional? The most common reason is like they have young kids, and the average full-time PM job outside of IC at a big company is like 50 to 60 hours a week. So if that's the case, like you're always going to be making trade-offs with either your partner or your kids. And most people who are choosing fractional don't want to do that.
So are you able to tell us a little bit about that secret project you're working on with Jason, the collaboration?
Oh yes, that was this post. So
that was
Jason, the podcast, we were talking about the product leadership job search, and at the same time we were working on this post. So this post was an insane amount of work because Jason booked 20 fractional product leaders to interview. So we had to like interview them. We had to analyze the results, write the piece, edit the piece, send the piece to all of them. A lot of them had lots of feedback, iterate for that, and then publish.
Okay, so if you listen to the Jason Knight podcast, this we're digesting that collaboration, that product. So
exactly, this is the result.
This is the result. So he went out and found the 20 fractional product leaders who you actually interviewed.
He has an awesome network. I think he's done like 250 episodes or something of his podcast. So I think like 15 of them had appeared on his podcast in the past. And so because he had kind of done them a solid by having him on his podcast, they were happy to appear in our piece.
Fascinating. And was there anything that you learned in working on this collaboration post that was either a surprise to you or you thought it went one way, but actually the fractional product leaders came back and said, no, it's not like that at all?
Oh my gosh, a lot of surprises, honestly. So actually that's probably the frame I use for anything I publish is I try to avoid talking about the stuff that you might already know and just focus on my surprises. And when I initially set out to write the draft of this piece, we were targeting like kind of my normal size, 7,000 to 8,000 words. But there were so many surprises in these 20 interviews that the piece is 20,000 words. So we've gone through some of the surprises already. I guess like a couple other surprises that I wasn't as, I don't know, maybe aware of. So one of them is that almost all fractional product leaders pursue a portfolio career where fractional is not the only source of their revenue. So I saw all the archetypes out there, but the sort of 3 or 4 most common ones. One is like the consultant. So they're doing a lot of assessments and they're doing a lot of workshops. And these workshops can pay a lot. Like it kind of blew my mind, but like there are big companies out there. Think of just like a company that has existed pre-tech that are now establishing tech that are used to paying a single 1-day workshop fee of like $25,000. That's just like, they don't even notice that fee. So there are tons of fractional leaders who do a lot of that. There are even ones who do like $100,000 fees for like 1 or 2 week projects. So you can make a ton of money just based on random things like that. Another sort of vector we see a lot of is the keynote speaker. I actually didn't realize that keynote speakers were pretty well paid, but yeah, your keynote speakers can get paid anywhere from $5,000 to $100,000. So they'll actively covet the keynote speaker slots that are like $100,000 pay. They'll actively like court the person who holds that budget. They'll send them like, this is my latest post that went viral. This is my latest thing that I just came up with. This is this recent research I did, so that they can get some of those gigs. And there are also company talks. So like if you see these people who are on like Google Talks on YouTube, for instance, those people got paid a ton of money to give that talk. So there's like that entire range. Then there's coaching. A lot of you probably listening RPMs, like we all could kind of use coaching in our jobs. Like,
and we all could
fundamentally
probably coach.
yeah. And our managers, I don't know, it's like a deficiency in product leaders generally that they don't always give like a lot of proactive, helpful working advice. Oftentimes the one-on-ones that you're having are like, did we ship this feature? What was this impact? My boss has this concern. And so they're just not working with you every week for 30 minutes like, well, let's look at this PRD. You kind of missed like countermetrics entirely on this PRD. Well, like you published this PRD, but it feels like it's only 60% complete. Well, you didn't do a future results write up for this feature. You just sent out an email. Don't you think we need to put that together? And so that's where coaches really come in and help. And a lot of people who I've talked to who have coaches, they like never let go of their coach. It's kind of like their secret in their career. It's like an investment, you know, especially if you're somebody listening who's making like upwards of $200,000, why wouldn't you spend $5,000 on a coach that could easily make you more than 2.5% better? Right. And so then if you think about it that way, it can make a lot of sense to sort of have this weekly or biweekly or monthly coaching session. So a lot of the fractional product leaders I talk to have like 50 mentees that they've had for like 8 years plus.
Wow.
So there you can have sort of these super long-term relationships with somebody who's actively helping you with your career. And the better coaches will even like have you do 360 feedback occasionally if your company doesn't, and they'll collect the results and they'll review the results with you. They might even do sessions like with people on your team. If like you and your design lead need to improve, they might jump in and have a call with both of you. So there's a lot of benefit to that. That's the coach. We talked about the workshop. We talked about the keynote speaker. And then we also see a good amount of people who rotate between interim and fractional. So those are kind of the main sort of areas. The sort of wild card portfolios, just 1 or 2 people we talk to. They also make money like as a typical creator. Maybe they have a newsletter. Maybe they have an ed tech business. Maybe they have sponsored posts on LinkedIn or X. So that's the other way.
So you're saying these people just in general are hustlers. They're type A personalities and they want to have a lot of things going on at the same time.
I don't know about type A, but definitely hustlers. Or you can almost just think about it as like they're operating in the business of themselves. And so if it's a dry spell of 2 to 3 months of revenue, they're not just sitting on their hands. They're finding a new revenue source and they're going after it.
Let's do a lightning round.
Let's do it.
Okay. If you could meet one person, dead or alive, who would it be?
I would probably meet FDR just because he somehow created the magical machine that is America.
In a good way or a bad way?
In a great way. I mean, I'm not like a huge fan of all of his government spending, but the fact is it worked.
That's after you said you'd say not interested in any politics.
Yeah, it's true, but he's had such a big impact. I guess alive and more tech, like I'd still want to meet Elon. I know he's pretty controversial, but it's hard to point to a business figure with more impact on the world.
What's your take on Elon's pay package? Approve or disapprove?
Yeah, he's underpaid. I mean, $56 billion for adding like $1,200 billion in market cap. That's like a great deal. Again, let's go back to the coaching thing I was talking about. Like, I'll take 5% deals any day of the week if I get to experience the upside. So, absolutely. I think he's super underpaid. And the fundamental fact is he also has so many alternatives. He raised $6 billion for XAI. He has a $45 billion Twitter. He has $125 billion SpaceX, $10 billion Neuralink, $10 billion Boring Company. Most people would be happy with any one of those. So for him to stay at Tesla, the investors have to give him money commensurate to it. What do you think?
I agree with you 100%. We did an episode on this actually, where I took your position. I think the All-In guys also took this position, but Scott Galloway, I think people with like more communist tendencies were like, "What? It's just too much money." But I think there are two issues. Number one, even if it is too much money, it's something that was already approved. So it's money that you signed off on, and then just pulling that back, I think, is already very problematic. And the second thing is it was conditional. That means if he wouldn't have delivered value, he would have walked away with nothing. And like, look at all of these CEOs of companies that don't add any value and they walk away with 20, 30 million. He was agreeing.
Yeah, David Zaslav, 50 million plus a year. All that dude has done is take the market cap of Warner Brothers from like 100 billion to 10 billion. Like, yeah.
So can we sit for a minute on failing up? Like,
yeah,
a ton of people who just do horribly in their job, and you know, in Fractional, maybe this can relate as well. But people who like really don't succeed and tear down an organization and don't add any value, then go just from destroying one organization and they're promoted right into destroying the next organization. How does that happen in a capitalist society?
Yeah, I feel like we're so much less meritocratic than we like to believe, right?
Yeah.
Especially as an executive, most of the people who fail up are executives. And so they've basically mastered the skill of managing up, managing peers, managing their presence. In this podcast, they would have come off like 10 times more authoritative than me. And so those are the people who tend to fail up really well. There's an art to failing up, which is about like controlling your narrative. And since this was a lightning round, I'll leave it there.
Okay, but you're touching on an interesting thing. You're saying that the skill that gets you promoted is managing up and managing your team. It's not delivering the actual value, which is officially what you're supposed to be doing on paper.
Yeah, and I think that's actually why Shreyas had a really good point. That's actually why product management has succeeded vis-a-vis marketing, customer support, product marketing, user research, design even in the last 15 years. Is because most product leaders are willing nowadays to take on like an actual business goal. They're like, yeah, like I'm going to deliver like X amount of revenue or X amount of profit. And some of the times they don't, which is the fail up we're talking about. But most of the times they are measured on that. And so that's why you'll see pretty high churn at these levels for people who don't meet it. But people who do meet it, those are the real rocket ship careers. So like I'm very impressed, for instance, by like Adam Mosseri, head of Instagram. So That's exactly what he did. I know multiple people who were PMs at Instagram, and they all told me like he would set the most crazy OKRs for Instagram. Like, we're going to be bigger than Facebook. He would set that as an Instagram 1 quarter, except he achieved it. And so then Mark had to reward him with becoming head of product at Instagram. So although the fail ups exist, you know, 95% of people who are hitting these positions, they're not the fail ups, but actually the people who succeeded.
I'm taking away two things from your comments. Number one, that ultimately there is a stopgap. Like at a certain point, you won't be able to continue failing up. Or is that not the case?
I think you can continue. Yeah. I personally have no idea how to coach you into replicating that. But I've also worked with several product leaders who just came in, ruined the organization, and now they're at, much better and bigger roles. And I think that I've certainly seen it.
But how do you identify the stars then? Or how do you become one of the stars that's not a destroyer?
Oh, gosh. I think probably just everything I write about in the newsletter, like a really good product leader needs to combine 2 or 3 world-class skills, whether that's product sense, product strategy, creating the org, improving weak performers, or managing the CEO, with like a full proficiency, like I would say like 80% of the way to mastery on the entire product management skill set. Writing great documents, convincing stakeholders, managing stakeholders, selling to customers, doing the right go-to-market motions, advising your marketing peers on how to actually message a product, all of the other things that are required as a product manager, influencing engineering. So a great product leader is like very T-shaped. They're just so world-class at something. And usually like the profile that I see most often is product sense. So this is probably why Shreyas has like a $2,000 weekend course on product sense. Is these are the people, like I remember working specifically with the leader of a firm who like every feature idea they come up with is just like a banger. Like it's gonna destroy the metric goals that it had for it. It like has like deep understanding of the competitive landscape, users, and what is working in your product and what's recently technically feasible. So that tends to be the most common.
Amazon has a value called, I might be butchering it, but leaders are right often. And
they're right.
I love it because it's like you can put in all of the we work hard, we're data driven, blah blah blah. But in the end of the day, it's like the people there. Armand, one of the guys we worked with, every idea he had would turn to gold. And there were other people who like they had ideas and we would launch them and nothing would happen. So you bet I wanted to be in the room with Armand being like, what's your next idea? Let's go,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I remember when that leader at a firm left. I just like had a meeting with him and I was like, can you just write down what you would do if you were me for like the next 3 years?
Funny story with that guy. He left to another company. I wrote a letter to the CEO saying, "Listen, I don't really know what you're doing, and I don't really care about what you're doing, but I know him, and I want to be wherever he is." Okay, and then so you've lived in many different places in the States. Can you talk about what's your favorite and why?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm moving to LA, so that has to be kind of the one. Like, why did we choose LA? So California is awesome, but San Francisco, when I lived there and moved there in the mid 2000s versus when I left in the late 2010s, just like totally deteriorated. Like, I just can't believe, like, I used to actually walk every day from the Mission all the way up through Soma on Market Street, all the way to work at Google. And it was beautiful. It was awesome. And now if you do that walk, you'll literally walk through like a 1 mile zombie land. It's actual like the apocalypse. Like these people are on bath salts. Like they don't even there are so many of them just walking around like so yeah, I wanted to be in California near the tech industry, but away from that, especially because I have kids. And the LA also, like, aside from having world-class weather, having good access to tech, I feel like it has a great food scene and entertainment scene. So everybody comes there. Like, I personally am really into comedy recently. If I wanted to see like a comic like Matt Rife or something like that, he's coming to the Triangle once every 5 years, which is where I currently live in North Carolina. He comes to LA like every 4 to 5 months. So I like that too.
It can sustain your sense of humor.
And just my cultural, yeah, like even Broadway, anything, right? They all come to LA. Even Bollywood actors come to LA.
If there's one message our listeners are going to walk away with, and it could be in the world of product management, or it could be just, Akash's wisdom, what do you want people to walk away with? What's the message?
Well, as you can see from my career, after a full career in product management and now doing content, or as you can see from this piece about a lot of product managers and product leadership people now doing a fractional or portfolio career, you should create your career to achieve what you want out of life. Not all of us want to be running around appeasing stakeholders as a PM our entire life. Not all of us want to do that 50 to 60 hours a week. We want to do that on a more manageable schedule, whatever it might be. Go for it. Like, you have all the abilities. If you've listened this far, you're probably a high performer PM. You can probably do anything. You can also just switch to a function in tech that is lower stress. And yes, you will get down leveled when you first switch, but 2 years from now, you'll be back to your current level. And so I feel like more people that I talk to day in, day out feel so fixed in their career. Akash, I've gotten 10 years of experience as a fintech PM. I'm like, it sounds to me like you want to be a gaming PM. Just do it. Like, you might get a down level for 2 years, but 4 years from now, because you like it, you'll be way further ahead.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed speaking with you.
Thanks for having me.